What is up, all of you beautiful, beautiful people? Welcome into another Dynasty by video with myself and Robbie Jeffries. Today we're going to be touching on rebuilds. That is the beautiful thing about Dynasty. If your team is out of it, as opposed to redraft, it's kind of it. You know, you fold up your lawn chair and you go home. Dynasty, that work is just beginning. So before we jump into it, I do just want to kind of touch on real quick, Robbie, what is your approach whenever you're making trades for rebuilds? I'll just throw mine out there. Obviously, you can look at, getting guys cheap who are going to be part of your dynasty teams for the next 2 to 3 years. But I think something that is, doesn't really seem to be talked about, maybe it is, and I just don't hear it. But I think you can also look at guys who you can buy low, kind of treating it like the stock exchange, right? You buy something low, you wait for it to increase in value, and then you cash out, you take that profit, and then you go buy something else. And that's kind of where, I think that's something that people can really look to do with their rebuild trades. But I'm curious to hear if, how you approach your rebuilds and how you kind of look at trades whenever one of your teams is in that situation.
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing I do more with rebuilds is I think you can take on more risk, right? Like when you have a championship team, you want to keep it safe. You want to get the production. You want to make sure it's now. You want to just make sure you have it all locked down. But with a rebuild, I think it's okay to take, some flyers on riskier players. Like, will he be better next year? Will he fall off a cliff? There's probably more emphasis on younger players, obviously, because your rebuild, you don't want to get the Todd Gurley who's maybe over the hill. You don't want to get the Frank Gores. You want to obviously get younger players because you're looking at that 2-3 year window as you are rebuilding. But I think it's also okay to take maybe a player that's young that hasn't quite popped yet, or someone that had a bad rookie year or something like that. So I like to add a little bit more risk in some of those players because they're cheaper in price, like you said, and then they have that chance. If they do hit on that stock, you're going way up and you're going to hasten your build to the top.
I will kick things off here for the brand. Got to go with my guy to start this off, and that is Denzel Mims. We did see him flash a little bit in that horrid, putrid, just flaming dumpster fire bag of shit on your front doorstep offense that they were in. One thing I think we also have to keep in mind with Mims, barely practiced during the offseason and training camp, and then he was put on IR to begin the season, didn't play until week 7 of this year. And I think just the fact that Adam Gase is out of that building, hopefully out of that state, get him as far away from Denzel Mims as you can possibly get him, I think that alone puts him on the rise. Add in the possibility of better quarterback play, and at the very least, if they stick with Sam Darnold, we should feel confident in that's going to be a better offensive scheme and a better offensive system set up for him. So I think Mims is someone who should see his production and therefore his fantasy stock rise over the next couple of seasons. So even if your team is, 2 to 3 years away from like actually contending, I think you could trade for Mims now. And like I said at the beginning of the video, you could either flip him and get more capital and, to be able to go and make a bigger trade, or you can just hold on to him and ride that out with Denzel Mims.
I think Carson Wentz kind of goes on that risky player tandem that I talked about early in this video. And right now he's QB 23 in January's ADP. And here's the thing. I don't think Carson Wentz is dead and gone. He's just broken right now, right? I think his cheerleaders in Howie Roseman and that the Eagles front office is still there. The head coach who he kind of butted heads with is gone. So I think his side of the party is still there. And so if Carson Wentz does stay with the Philadelphia Eagles, I think he has a chance to compete for that job with Jalen Hurts, because as much as Jalen Hurts balled out fantasy-wise, he had his struggles. He was much better at pushing the ball down the field. I'll absolutely give him that. But he completed even less percent of his passes than Carson Wentz with just 55%. We saw some games where he really struggled to just get completions and first downs. So I think it's still an open QB competition there. And then there's also the opportunity of Wentz being traded. I think a lot of people have kind of linked him to Indianapolis with that Frank Reich connection. So I think that's a possibility. But then there's also New England after the Cam Newton experiment failed. I think there's a couple of options there. I think there's a couple of opportunities for Carson Wentz, who, again, I think we've seen years of Carson Wentz being good, and we saw 1 year last year of him being really, really bad. I'm going to choose to believe that he's not as bad as a long-term quarterback as we saw this year. He can be fixed. And so I think he's a guy that you can probably get for an early 2022nd in Superflex leagues. If we're talking about single QB leagues, man, he might be, a third, a fourth even. I don't even know. So yeah, I think this is a guy that you can get for super cheap, and you can wait. Maybe he doesn't get a starting gig right away. Maybe he's a Jameis Winston wait and see kind of situation, and then we're looking at a year later. But that's the beauty with a rebuild, is that you can take these riskier players, wait a little bit, and see if they hit, because right now he's very, very cheap.
Yeah, I think he's someone who almost no matter what happens, his situation has to improve one way or another. You were kind of mentioning cap space and players who might be moving and opening things up. As it stands right now, the Minnesota Vikings are one of 13 teams over the cap per Spotrac. So someone I want to bring to the table as a rebuild kind of piece, and I normally don't really talk about this position all that much, and that is Irv Smith at tight end. Like I said, they are in some cap trouble. But if Adam Thielen were to be traded or released, and again, getting a little bit older, obviously you have the emergence of Justin Jefferson, who just absolutely tore it up this year. Minnesota would save, depending on whenever they were to trade or release him, they would save either $8 or $11 million on their cap. And the guy that obviously Irv Smith would be usurping would be Kyle Rudolph. And again, Minnesota could save even more cap space if they were to move on from him as well, even though they just gave him that extension. So they could save either $5 or $8 million, whether that's a pre or post June 1st move, I believe. So you could potentially be looking at a team that has Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, and then enter Irv Smith. Obviously, we really liked his collegiate production. He's a young guy who's going to be 23 for the entire 2021 season, entering his third year. We all talk about the third year tight end and wide receiver leaps in the NFL. He ran a 80th percentile 40-yard dash and had a 71st percentile speed score. And, we did see him pop a little bit this year. And obviously if Thielen and Rudolph are out of the picture, that's just going to clear things up for him. Even in a run-first, Mike Zimmer, old-ass 1940 dinosaur offense, I still think Irv Smith could be a player who could still get his and give you good production. I think he was like tight end 15 or tight end 16 in January's ADP. So I think what we're seeing with some of these guys, like Kelsey, Kittle, Darren Waller, there's a clear advantage to having one of these guys. Like you said, you can take chances on some of these guys when you're in a rebuild. I really don't think Irv Smith is going to cost you too much. So he's someone who I'd definitely be kicking the tires on. And especially if you're still out, another 2 to 3 seasons, you can wait on the tight end position to really pop. And I think Irv Smith has, if everything hits for him, top 5 tight end upside.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He has the athleticism. That's a perfect rebuild, because maybe it takes a year, maybe it takes 2 years, but that upside is definitely there. I'm going to talk about a player who I think we saw a lot of his upside the latter half of the year, but for some reason his Dynasty ADP isn't following that, and that's David Montgomery, who's running back 20 in January ADP, even after his amazing end stretch of the year. This man brought home championships, and he was running back 4 on the year, and he's not even 24 yet. So that's the recipe for a top 5 running back, right? Except it's not. He's running back 20, which I just don't get at all. The knock on him, which I will agree, is that with Tariq Cohen out, he obviously had the backfield all to himself. He had the highest snap share of any running back. We're looking at like 2019 Christian McCaffrey-like snap shares. And his 68 targets in 2020 probably goes down in 2021 with Tariq Cohen coming back into the fold. But the Bears have seen that he can do this. He did this at Iowa State. He's a really good receiving back. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Tariq Cohen get his 100 targets. Maybe Tariq Cohen's more in that 60, 70 range. And David Montgomery can still get 40, 50 targets, maybe around that Joe Mixon range of receiving targets. So I think he can still keep that as part of his game. And then let's talk about just him as a runner. He was a top 15 running back in yards after contact. He ranked bottom 10 in yards before contact. We're talking about one of the worst offensive run blocking lines. For 2 years now, he's been running behind him. He managed to overcome it this year, and heaven help me if Chicago doesn't address that in the draft this year. They have to, and so I hope that gets better for him. He was a workhorse back this last year with over 300 touches. I still think he will get a lot of that work back, so 275 plus going forward in 2021. So I'll take the talent that we saw from him. I'll take the volume that we saw from him in an offense that I would only hope can get better at the run blocking, because it's really hard to get worse than they were the past 2 years. So that's a guy I'm absolutely looking at for rebuild.
The last one that I want to touch on real quick, Parris Campbell. I think he's someone who is super interesting for a rebuild. He's going to bring something to that Colts offense that they don't currently have, which is speed and versatility. He was obviously used at running back at Ohio State. We saw him being used on a couple of handoffs in his injury-shortened season this year. He actually got injured, I think, on a design run play for him. And that game before, he led the team, or he tied the team lead in targets with 9, and he also tied the team lead in catches with 6, and he led the team with 71 receiving yards. And I talked about Michael Pittman on the buy low video we did. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you check that out after this one's over. But I think that is an offense that, as well as they performed this year, they could improve going forward as well if a quarterback who could do a little bit more than what Phillip Rivers did this year. So I think Campbell falls into that. You can either take the chance on him because of his injuries, or he falls into the perfect buy low right now. Wait until he pops up, halfway through the season, puts up some good production, and then you can flip him even if you don't believe in him long term. The one caveat I will say with that is, if you want to do moves like that, just make sure that your league is active. There's nothing worse than going out, acquiring a bunch of these guys and being like, all right, as soon as Parris Campbell jumps off, I'm going to flip him. Then he jumps off. It all seems to be falling in place for you. And then your league is kind of crickets, and there's 2 or 3 teams that are always moving and shaking, and the rest of the league is semi inactive. So that would be the one thing that I would caution if you're newer to Dynasty. Before you go out and make all these moves, make sure that your league is actually active and will help out in your rebuild.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there's nothing worse than you have that rebuild in mind, and then nobody's kind of letting you flip these players back to them. So you definitely have to make sure that those leagues are active. I'm going to go back to the tight end. Well, we're going to have 2 tight ends in our buys here for the rebuilds, because I think this is the position I think you definitely buy for rebuilds, because we've seen that they take some time. You talked about Irv Smith going into his 3rd season. I'm going to talk about Mike Gesicki going into his 4th season. We don't talk about the tight end going into their 4th season all the time, but I think that can apply here maybe. Mike Gesicki is tight end 11 in ADP, so he's just inside top 12 tight ends. But for his production this past year, I feel like he's kind of underrated just because he was very hit or miss. I know a lot of tight ends are very hit or miss, but he was definitely in that range as well. He finished as 4th in receiving yards of all tight ends, which really surprised me when I was kind of researching him. I figured he would be down there at 10, 11, 12, but he was 4th in receiving yards. He ranked top 10 in yards per reception. He's a down the field type of guy, which we knew, coming out of Penn State. He's basically a glorified wide receiver, right? He's 6'6", 250, but he runs in the 4.5s for his 40 time. He's a 99 percentile athlete in burst, agility, and catch radius on playerprofile.com. So, that's comparable to Vernon Davis, one of the most athletic tight ends of all time. So he's an athlete that happens to also be good at catching the football. We've seen him improve in every single season. The first year, he was kind of a dud. Second year, we saw some blips. Then this 3rd year, he has over 700 receiving yards, and we see him kind of ascend as a really go-to target along with Devontae Parker. Now, we need Tua to continue to develop, and Tua has the skills. I think he just needs to work on the confidence a little bit, and I think that comes. We're talking about a lot of rookies who didn't have an off season, so I do think Tua gets better and starts pushing the ball down the field like we saw Ryan Fitzpatrick do when he was the starter. So Gesicki enters his season number 4 in 2021, and kind of going back to Vernon Davis, I just kind of, not to compare him completely, but that's when we saw Vernon Davis take off as tight end 1 all the way back, Cody, to 2009, take you back to yesteryear. He was a tight end 1. He really popped off, had 13 touchdowns, over 900 yards. And he followed that up with a tight end 3 and a tight end 8 season. So I think this is kind of your last chance to buy low on Mike Gesicki before he kind of ascends, because he's either going to ascend or he's not going to do it at all. And I think he definitely ascends here in year 4.
Leave it to Adam Gase to take a physical specimen like that with his athleticism and be like, you know what he should do? He should block. That's what we should do. Let's put him in line and make him block. So I think he's still showering off some of that Adam Gase stench. And I do like his outlook with Tua, or maybe even, dare I say, Deshaun Watson. Either way, we also have to remember with Tua that he was dealing with that hip injury coming into this year, and kind of got thrown into the fold as the starting quarterback halfway through the year. So we appreciate all you checking this out. If you are not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe and that like button. It really helps us out. If you have any questions, comments, things that you would like to see from us going forward, please let us know by dropping a comment below, and please be sure to check out the other videos that we have done, and we'll talk to you guys soon.